I'm Michael Nickell. I'm the museum scientist and naturalist for the Sibley Nature Center, and this is our latest occasional podcast. And today I have a very special guest, Mr. John Muir Laws. John, but you like to be called Jack?
Jack's so much shorter than John, it's really convenient.
Okay, we'll use Jack, but by my first question, need to use John. Maybe it's my imagination, but it seems to me like you've got a really unique name, John Muir Laws, and you're from California. Is there a little story that goes with this?
There is a story. It's kind of a fun one, and it's interesting. My parents named me John Muir Laws. They actually had a hard time figuring out what they would name me. I was an unnamed infant for a long time, baby boy Laws. Had I been a girl, it would have been Molly. But my mom was a lawyer for the Sierra Club.
Okay.
They were both, their whole courtship was running around in the Sierra Nevada mountains together, so they loved the mountains. Mm-hmm. And they're very familiar with John Muir, but I'm actually not named after John Muir.
Oh, okay.
So it's John after my grandfather on my mom's side, okay. And my and Muir after the great-grandmother on the other side of the family, who helped raise my father and was a really formative person in his world and his growing up. And so they knew that my middle name would be Muir, but it wasn't until maybe a month or so after I was born, one of my mom's friends finally got fed up with me not being named and sent her this very, very straightforward letter saying that you need to name your child, and I think you should name him John after your father. But everybody should call him Jack. And apparently this was in the day when people had penmanship, right? So she had this flowing, really beautiful handwriting. And she wrote, you should call him Jack. And then she wrote out Jack Laws with a beautiful script. And she said, it sounds like a stagecoach driver. And so my mom saw that, and she thought, wow. So I would have either grown up working for Wells Fargo or becoming a naturalist, and I became a naturalist.
Okay. After that other John Muir.
That's right. So John Muir, the naturalist, okay, who was responsible for Yosemite and lots of preservation of amazing natural spaces, worked with Teddy Roosevelt to help bring in our national park system.
Okay. You are a native of the San Francisco Bay Area of California. It's a bit of a. I've never been there. What is it like?
Well, the bay itself is an incredible harbor, and really easy to miss if you're heading up and down the coast. Mm-hmm. They think that Sir Francis Drake, as he was going up the coast, a privateer who was trying to find Spanish galleons to loot, might have completely missed it. But on a good day with no fog, it's a magnificent bay, and it's an interesting area ecologically because there's a lot of different habitats in very close proximity to each other. Also, right next to a really dense urban area. So in a blink of an eye, you can be going from hanging out in a redwood forest to at the beach on the coast to open oak woodland savanna. And so for being a naturalist who's got an interest in exploring different sorts of habitats and seeing different groups of birds, mammals, and these sorts of things, it was a really great place to grow up.
Okay. Well, I'll kind of turn the tables on that. This is your first trip to the West Texas region, I take it?
That's right.
Do you have any first impressions?
So my first impression is about the people. Everybody here has just been so welcoming and kind to this lost Californian. I've had an absolutely wonderful time here, and then ecologically, really interesting area. I got a chance to go out with you into the field and take a look at these areas which were originally grassland and then have been, through contact with human beings, converted into these mesquite fields. I see where you're also bringing some of those back. the bird life that is then mixed into this, I got a little glimpse of that. Some really beautiful, amazing birds, and I want to come back here and do a little bit of some serious birding.
Yeah. Well, initially, when we did this project several years ago, taking this mesquite scrubland back to shortgrass prairie, one of the main things that we were trying to attract were grassland ground species of sparrows that built their nest on the ground, like Cassin sparrow. We haven't had the success there just yet, but it could still happen.
Well, I wonder if that might be sort of a scale thing. The patches
Yeah.
that I saw were kind of small.
They were small, and so yeah, that could very well be. It's just not enough to attract them for nesting. But we at least wanted to have a sampling of what a shortgrass prairie would look like. So we took about a total, I think, about 14 acres and took it back to shortgrass prairie.
Maintaining that and seeing if you can expand that. I think bringing back that ecosystem, it would be fascinating to see if you could then invite back all those ground nesting species.
Well, I've heard that, certainly here in North America, that it's the grassland habitats that are probably the most threatened. It's one of those things for us to talk about as far as the staff, but that's another.
I'm
issue.
behind that project.
Yeah,
Should you go in that direction? I think that's a great thing. The more that sort of a diversity of different ecological types we have, it gives you this sort of a fabric that if you create the habitat, then the species can come back into it.
Yeah.
It makes ecologically just a much richer area.
Yeah. Yes, I mean the prairie habitats is just it's very close and near and dear to my heart. Always has been. But you are here at our invitation to conduct a nature journaling workshop at Sibley Nature Center yesterday. Could you explain what is nature journaling?
Nature journaling is a way of connecting yourself more deeply with the natural world, or every part of the world that is going on around you. What you do is you bring a notebook with you as you are out adventuring and exploring in the woods or brush fields or grasslands, and anything that you see, you try to describe and document that on the pages of your book. So that could be making lists of what you see, drawing pictures of what you see, making maps of different sorts of habitats and sort of where you found the badger den. What you try to do is to get your observations out of your head and onto a piece of paper. And this does several really interesting things. One is it makes you a better observer. So in the moment itself, you notice more when you're keeping these kinds of notes. What you have on paper helps you notice what you haven't recorded, where you haven't looked. And so I find again and again when I'm making observations about anything, if I'm just standing there looking, I can be staring at something, but my brain isn't nearly as active as if I'm documenting and keeping notes. So one thing it does is it helps me pay attention.
Well, I see you've got the notebook right there in front of you, and I see some illustrations, some sketches that you've already done. It looks to me like that you were doing illustrations of the annular eclipse that we just got through experiencing.
That's right. If I didn't do this, years from now, I might have some vague recollection of having seen the eclipse. But the specifics and details would have faded into the fog of my mind to the point where eventually they're thinking, oh yeah, I think I saw one of these once. This eclipse where the sun just became a glowing ring in the sky, an incredible, vivid moment. You think, how could this fade? And I just want to say, like at the same time, one of my favorite moments about this experience was during that peak where the sun turned into a ring. went and looked underneath trees, and every place that light was coming down through the holes in the branches, there were thousands and thousands of glowing rings on the ground. The tree leaves acted as a sort of pinhole camera, casting all of these circles onto the ground in front of me. And so in my notes that I have here, I actually don't, I've got a drawing of the sun and that phase, but I don't have any notes about what the tree leaves were doing. And so my next goal, once we're done with this interview, I'm going to be writing and making some little sketches and doodles to remind me of all of these sort of dancing little interlocking rings. That's going to help make that moment, that would be possible that we'd forget, make that moment stick with me for the rest of my life.
Okay. Are you also a gallery artist? Do you do paintings and drawings that people would normally hang on their walls, or?
Some people have put some of my drawings on their walls, but I don't really have the patience to sit down and make a big painting for a wall. For me, the most interesting thing is going out into the field and finding the next jackrabbit, finding the next bird, making observations of whatever nature is giving me in that moment.
Yeah.
And almost all my work is in little bound notebooks. I also do scientific illustrations, so I will make drawings that I use for books. I've written some books about the natural history of the Sierra Nevada, an identification field guide. So I painted all the different kinds of birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and insects, and flowers, and trees, and all the different sorts of critters up in the Sierra. For those drawings, a lot of them aren't done live in the field. But for me, the thing that I really love doing is not taking some drawings and turning them into a final finished piece. I want to go back out into the field and start looking at the animal again.
Well, what I've come to really appreciate, whether it's through your work or the work that I've done, is I find what you do right here, much more intimate, much more personal, almost like a visual diary. And to me, for me personally, I get more enjoyment out of doing journal type stuff or workbook type stuff, my own personal workbook type stuff. I get much more joy out of it than I do trying to do finished pieces.
I'm exactly in the same boat.
Okay.
And there's a couple of parts of that for me. One is, sometimes when you're drawing this, you get this inner critic that comes up and says to you, oh, that's slightly the wrong angle there. And if you start kind of obsessing about I've got to make this look really good, we become more interested in what the thing looks like on paper than what the thing looks like that is sitting right in front of you.
Yeah.
If you're doing it for your own personal notes in a journal or something like this, a lot of that art pressure is off, because you don't have to make this look good so you can sell it to the person or put it in the book.
Right.
You're doing this for you. You're doing this as a way of connecting more intimately with this little beastie that has decided to pop up and join you alongside the trail.
Yeah.
And it's about you and that relationship with the beastie.
Absolutely.
As opposed to this is going to be now the thing that's going to hang on the wall of a gallery.
If you could pigeonhole yourself, or at least make a stab at it, would you consider yourself an artist, a scientist, or an educator?
Ooh, you made it more challenging there. I'm going to give you a cheat answer that's going to involve all three.
Okay.
I am an educator who teaches people and connects people with nature and science through using art.
Okay.
So art is my tool, how I do it. I think that the science is the thing that I'm the most excited and fascinated in. So that's what I want to teach about. But I personally love the process and experience of teaching. I remember when I was a student in grad school, I thought I'd go to grad school and then become like a full-time wildlife biologist running around in the woods. I found that while I was doing that work, one of the things that really kept me going is I was a teaching assistant in a class. Mm-hmm. And like, oh, good, I get to teach today. Yeah. I love the idea of kind of how do you take a complex idea and how do I get myself to understand that well enough that I can deconstruct it for somebody else and rebuild it in somebody else's brain without, simplifying this thing to the point that we've lost a lot of the nuance in it. How can you, the challenge of teaching is really fun for me, but I also just love our species. I love interacting with human beings, and teaching allows me to do that again and again and again.
Okay. Well, I don't consider that a cheat answer at all. That's an answer that is inspiring for me. So I greatly appreciate your response. Take yourself back in time just a little bit. Do you remember the very first drawing, or whether it be pencil or crayon or whatever? Do you remember your very first drawing? How old were you, and what was it?
I have no idea.
No idea?
I have no idea. That's my mental wayback machine doesn't go back that far.
Okay.
And what I found is when I look through my parents' photo albums of times when I was younger, I can often vividly recall a bunch of those moments. But what I think is going on is I'm just looking at the picture and my brain is inventing the story around it.
Oh, I see.
So I don't think that those are really authentic memories.
Okay.
I do remember the first time that I nature journaled.
Okay. Tell me about that.
So my parents were both very interested in nature and natural history. My mom was more of our family botanist. My dad was our family birder. And we would go on family botany walks and adventures. And my mom coordinated all the logistics for a botanist friend of hers. We could go out with this botanist friend who would say, we're going to go to this place. My mom would kind of arrange for everybody all the people who wanted to join on this group to be at the same place at the same time if you needed to get rooms or something. So she handled all of those logistics. And there was a friend of hers who would come along on these, a woman named Neela. And Neela had a notebook. Neela was an artist. And Neela would walk through the fields and she'd see flowers that she was interested in and she would sit down and she would draw them. I was along on one of these trips with Neela, and my mom noticed that all day I was essentially Neela's shadow.
Okay.
Everywhere she would go, her little son was just sort of walking along next to her, kind of looking up, and she would sit down, and I would sit down on the grass right next to her, and I'd watch her draw. And then she'd pick up and move to the next one. I'd pick up with her and I'd kind of move on to the next one. So everywhere she went, I was just watching her drawing. And my mom thought to herself, like, okay, there's something, this boy who's usually up, down, over, around, and through, kind of getting into every place and everything's business. All of a sudden, he's still, look at the focus that's going on. So the next time we went out on one of our family nature adventures, she said, honey, come around to the back of the car here, and I've got something to show you. And so we went around to the back of the old Plymouth Valiant. She opened up the trunk, and inside the trunk was the same kind of notebook. And she had sat down with Neela and said, what journal do you use? What pencils do you use? And she got me an exact copy of the kit that Neela used to do her sketching and drawing. And she said, this is for you. And I knew exactly what to do with it. And I ran out into the field and sat down and started drawing flowers and sketching everything that I saw.
That's a fantastic story. I love that. I do. Are you working on any special projects right now, or travels? What's going on in your life right now?
Let's see. There's a bunch of different things that are my brain is engaging with. Every week, I am teaching free online workshops about how to do nature journaling, how to draw pictures of what you see, how to sort of think like a scientist, leading discussion groups with educators of how can we best use nature journaling in our classrooms, or if you're a homeschool teacher, how can you engage your family with this same practice of nature journaling. I'm also involved in a startup of a nonprofit organization to help people everywhere do nature journaling. We call it the Wild Wonder Foundation, and to help people who are practicing nature journaling themselves get more resources. If you want to find out how to do things, how can you find mentors? If you're a mentor, how can you find people who want to work with you? Nature journaling is such a powerful way of connecting people in a really meaningful way with the natural world around them. And what I see happens when people make these kind of connections is that we're then willing to step forward as a steward, as somebody who's willing to do the work to help protect natural places and spaces. And so by helping more people learn how to nature journaling, we're expanding and growing a community of people who care about the natural systems that are around them and are willing to step forward to do the work to protect these wild places and species. So those are a couple of my big interests and passions.
Okay. Project yourself in the future, let's say 5 years from now. Where do you see yourself artistically, in science and in education? So in 5 years, you'll be doing what?
I don't know. I think so. My whole life, I've never. I very seldom have had, here's my plan. This is what I'm going to do. That there's one point in my life where I kind of knew for the next 7 years what I was going to do.
Okay.
But usually what I do is I kind of make my way along, and I find that if you are doing the best that you can at what you do, opportunities open up around you. And those and they are surprising and interesting. And if you are paying attention, you can see them when they arise, and you can take advantage of those. I know it will be something that is coming from this collection of skills that I've been developing. Somehow teaching, somehow nature, art, this foundation, whatever, these different pieces, they're moving us together, but I don't know exactly where that will be. Okay. I know there's one point in my life where I did have this big goal plan, and that was I had been sort of my original career. I'd spent a lot of time as an environmental educator, and I would be out in the field with kids. And the problem is that if you do a good job doing something like that, you then get promoted. And the more that you get promoted, the more time you end up sitting behind a desk.
Yes.
And so I ended up, I went from being a person who was in the field working with people to a person sitting behind a desk and doing budgets. Now, I'm dyslexic, and I am terrible at making budgets. But you get promoted to this stuff, and then what happens to a lot of people is you kind of get promoted to this point where, like, you're doing a terrible job, so you don't get promoted anymore, but you don't get to go back to what you were doing before. So there I was a manager, I was budgeting, and this was at this time, my grandmother, my mom's mom, who had sort of been my artistic muse, was dying. And so I spent a lot of time with her as she would be sleeping at night, just sort of sitting by her bedside and And if she would wake up and have a more lucid moment, then there'd be a family member there who could talk to her. And so at night, that was me. That was how I could help. And so it gave me a lot of time to think about, like, when I'm there, what do I want my life to be about? And so I realized that there were several things. One is I really wanted to be a daddy, and I'm not. And life is moving along, and I'm doing that. But then I thought, you know what I also really want to do? I want to run up to the Sierra Nevada mountains and make a field guide of all the birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, insects, wildflowers, trees, shrubs, star charts, animal tracks, everything that you see up there. I wanted to make a book that would make that really, really easy for anybody who didn't know natural history to identify this stuff, and wanted it to all be in color. And I realized at some point I'm going to be in that bed and I'm thinking to myself, you know what I really should have done? I should have made that book. So after my grandmother died, I went to my supervisor and handed in my resignation and went to study scientific illustration for a few months, and then took off to the mountains of the Sierra Nevada with a backpack filled with paper and granola bars. And for the next 6 years, that's what I did. I painted, drew everything that I encountered, and ended up with a really, really useful full-color illustrated book of the biodiversity of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of a departure from my usual thing of just, like, you do your best with what you have, you pay attention, and doors will open. And when that door opens, you decide whether or not you want to step through or not.
You just conducted a nature journaling workshop for us at Sibley Nature Center. And what it was not a how-to draw. I mean, granted, you gave some demonstrations on how you drew things, and it was very informative watching you do that, but that was not the focus of your nature journaling workshop. I took that workshop, and I personally, I don't need lessons in drawing. Mm-hmm. I don't need lessons in painting. But what you gave me was exactly what I needed. I needed a new focus. I needed a new direction. I needed a new way of thinking about what I do. Mm-hmm. And sir, you delivered.
Well, thank you.
I thank you. And so, you remember when we were doing our introduction type thing? Went around the room, you'd say your name and why you're taking this. You remember what I said? I said, this has been a project that's been in the making for at least prior to COVID. And so it's been at least a 3-year project just to get you here. And so if you remember, I told you that I selfishly asked you to come here for me. Now, other people got advantage of it too, but I put it right on the line. I got you here because I needed you here. Thank you.
Well, I've been honored and delighted to come here. Like I said, this experience has been wonderful for me. I brought my whole family with me, and they are having the best time.
You've got a wonderful family. Oh my goodness,
we're having a great time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the most important thing, if you're thinking about doing this sort of journaling, you think it's going to be like, what is the best trick for drawing a deer?
Yeah.
What is the best trick for drawing a squirrel? What is the best trick for drawing an acorn? And if you look at it that way, then there's like a bunch of little drawing tricks, but it's not really about that. More important than that is a mindset of how to think about what you're doing and why you're doing that, and that guides what you're doing. So I know that sounds very sort of loose to people who weren't there in the workshop, but specifically giving people a toolkit of how to pay deeper attention, how to ask questions that are richer, and how to stimulate your creative thinking and your ability to make connections between things that you see, and give yourself permission to get all that information down on a piece of paper. When that happens, the way you see, the way you interact with the world fundamentally changes.
Yes.
And I think that that's the most useful thing that we can teach people about this nature drawing. Sometimes in my classes I do teach, like, I'll have a class on let's draw a deer.
Yeah.
And what if the deer is from the side? What if it's from the back? How do you do a drawing of a deer at a 3/4 view angle? So I do teach these sorts of things, but I think that those sorts of skills are you can think of those as tools in service of paying this kind of attention.
Yeah.
And if you get too focused on the tool, you lose track of the real project that you're doing, which is being present, being alive, paying attention to the natural world that is right in front of you.
I could not agree with you more. That's exactly right. Well, that's only part of the reason that you were here. I think that's just a funny feeling that I have. I think the real hook that I got you here was what happened today, and that was the annular eclipse. I just had to dangle that in front of you, saying that Midland, Texas is probably going to be the best spot in the entire nation for viewing that annular eclipse.
Oh, and we had the perfect skies.
Oh, yeah.
We had a wonderful group of just the collection of people that came out, where people were sitting in chairs that they brought out. There was all these photographers who had their cameras up. We had I made an eclipse projector, so if you didn't have a special camera or lens that you could look through, you could see an enlarged version of what was going on in the sky. It was projected through a telescope. Being here for this eclipse was amazing. It was wonderful. I had intended to be under the totality of our was it 2017? Was that the last eclipse? Well, the big one that the last big eclipse that we had.
I think it's about. Yeah, that sounds about right. It was also an annular eclipse, but it occurred right at sunset.
Oh, so I wasn't. I didn't have that one. This was the last total eclipse.
Oh, the last total eclipse. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So my two daughters were very, very young, and we got the whole team up to Oregon, and then Oregon, the state of, and the day of, we're going to kind of drive into the zone of the totality. We had all these plans, and the entire state became one giant parking lot.
Oh, wow.
And we decided, like, we're not going to be able to make it into that. We just kind of hung out in a park and kind of enjoyed it and had a wonderful experience seeing a very, very close to a full eclipse. But I have never in my life been under the full eclipse, and this is my first experience with an annular eclipse.
Oh.
And so I kind of knew in my head, because I'd seen in books what was supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But when it all went down, I felt so electric, so alive. I found myself like running around under all the trees, looking at what the light was doing, listening to what the birds were doing. All the birds were going like, "Oh my gosh, it's time to go to bed. We better do our sort of before bedtime singing." And all the birds were kind of getting their final activities ready before they were to tuck into bed. And it was wonderful to be there. And also, I think the crew of people who decided to come out to the Sibley Nature Center, it sort of brought out kind of a like-minded, very friendly, joyful group of people, and people were just sort of sitting around, laughing, being alive, paying attention, and it was a great event.
Yeah, I noticed that too. There was a guy that flew in specifically from Chicago, and he flew in today to do the eclipse, and flying out tonight. And all of his co-workers back in Chicago thought the guy was nuts, and nobody's going to attend that. And so he wanted to make sure that I was going to I took photographs of the people doing the eclipse thing, and so he wanted to make sure that I published those photographs on our website as proof that he was actually here and that there were other people here with him, that he was not. You know, he was not just some nut job, you know, and by himself.
Well,
No.
that's one of the things that a place like the Sibley Nature Center does is it's kind of creates a hub
Yeah.
around which people who have interests in these things can kind of come in, make connections with each other.
Yeah.
And that's a really useful sort of service in the community. It's so much fun to kind of geek out about stuff with a critical mass of other people who are, you know, are really into geeking out about this stuff instead of like, oh, that's nice, right? But these are people who are kind of making the effort. Not just you could step outside your door. All the bunch of people there were locals, and they could have stepped right outside their door today, but they said, like, let's go over to the Sibley so that we can do this around a bunch of other people who are also just getting excited about how wonderful it is to be right here, right now.
Yeah, it does help out in all kinds of ways to be around people who value the same things that you do. There's energy, there's power in that.
Yeah.
And
also, this naturalist will notice this thing about something. Somebody else will have a slightly different take on it.
Yeah.
And so if you're interacting and bouncing off of all those people, it helps you see even more in that same event.
yeah, I made the comment to your wife while you were conducting your program about the eclipse. I kind of whispered to her, "He's in his element." She said, "Yeah." Yeah, you were bouncing around. You were animated, and it was great.
That was so much fun. That was so much fun. And like I said, a big part of it is just there was the nicest, group of folks that you'd want to kind of hang out with, and that makes such a difference. Kind of the community that comes together around something.
Oh yeah. We'll talk about this right here. Probably the last thing I want to talk about. I just, by accident, sheer happenstance, because I draw and paint animals and nature.
You're a trained scientific illustrator. I've seen not just draw, paint animals. So if anybody's watching this, go over to the Sibley, look at the artwork on the wall.
Well,
guess who did it?
I just say I dabble.
But dabbling aside, it is something that you have put the time in on, and you really pay attention, and that the things which we work at, we develop those skills.
Yeah.
And you really have not just sort of a solid understanding of the fundamentals of scientific illustration, but the things you draw feel alive. It's one thing to get them accurate, but accurate and alive takes time really paying attention, and you put in that time.
Thank you very much, and I'm almost speechless over that. I appreciate that. But I want to talk about these books right here. By sheer happenstance, I found this, The Laws Guide to Nature Drawing and Journaling. And sometimes, depending on where you get the book, you can take a sneak peek on the inside a few of the pages. Mm-hmm. And when I did that, I says, I got to get this book. First and foremost, I got to get this book for me. And then I got to get a copy for Sibley Nature Center. And by the way, wait a minute. The people who are interested in this book also got this book, The Laws Guide to Drawing Birds. I am personally, faithfully working through this book right now in my own time at home.
Ah, that's good. I hope there's some really useful strategies in there.
There is. There's a tremendous amount of. And when I get done with this one, I'm going to this one. But this one, I started out drawing birds.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is the one that I wanted to do first. But when I get done with this, I'm not just copying things out of your book, but I'm doing some of that to understand how you put the lines on the paper and proportions and things like that. But also, I've got access to specimens of birds, and so I can take one of those fresh specimens and actually apply what you're trying to teach. And wait, there's more. I see this one. How to Teach Nature Journaling, Curiosity, Wonder, and Attention. Do you have any more books besides these 3 fantastic books?
I do. I've got the Laws Guide to the Sierra Nevada, another book called Sierra Birds, another on Sierra Wildflowers.
Okay.
And I'm now working on another one called the Nature Journal Workbook.
Okay.
And these are all there's in my head there's actually a whole bunch of other books that I want to do. The problem is that there's just at some point I'm going to run out of time.
Yes.
And we all do. And but between then and now, I'm really having a lot of fun. When you make a book like this, it really forces you to focus your attention, and it forces you to articulate things that you otherwise might not be explicit with. So I found that, for instance, making the book on how to teach nature journaling made me a better nature journaling teacher. The kind of focus that I put in for the Laws Guide to Nature Drawing and Journaling, that's more of a technique book. So the how to teach nature journaling, if you are a homeschool parent, if you are a classroom teacher, and you're wanting to take your class or your students, your child, and help them be able to do this, it's a really useful book to be able to do that. It's not so much a book on the specifics of how do you draw bird feathers.
Right.
Or how do you draw a spiraling shell or whatever it is. Those sorts of details are more in the Laws Guide to Nature Drawing and Journaling. But each one of those kind of took me on an adventure, and when you have to kind of articulate something to yourself and think, how can I communicate this in the way that's the most clear, then it makes you better at doing whatever you're doing.
Okay. I just kind of the direction of this conversation, it takes me back to one art teacher that I had at UTPB, the University of Texas at the Permian Basin, and people who hear this are I'm sure they're going to recognize the name. It's Pam Price. I had her for an oil painting course. I had not painted in oils before. And she did not say one word to me throughout the entire course. And I considered her to be one of my best art teachers. And so years after...
Wait, so that's a really interesting statement. Unpack that for me. What was that Pam did that was so effective for you?
She let me be me. She was not trying to fix me. She was not trying to change me. She was not trying to direct me. I specifically didn't have any questions for her, but anyway, it was years after I had taken her oil painting course that I went, and I don't remember why she called Sibley Nature Center, but anyway, I remember talking to her on the phone, and I asked her if she remembered me, and she did. I said, Pam, you were one of the best art teachers I've ever had. And she says, I didn't do anything. I knew you would figure it out. All you needed was a time and a place to sit down and paint, and you figured it out. That's what made her so great.
Putting in just time doing anything.
Yeah.
Our brains grow when we challenge ourselves and then we rinse and repeat.
Right.
And through doing that, we used to think that human brains, through our development, would grow through adolescence, then they would stop, and then over time would sort of slowly degenerate depending on how much partying you were doing. But now we know that all human brains throughout our entire lifetimes are constantly growing and developing new neural connections. But it is specifically in response to the work that we do and the effort that we put in doing things. So when you are repeating something that's challenging, that work stimulates your brain to grow new neurons. So learning how to draw is something that everybody can do. There's nobody who's born an artist. It's a skill that you develop by doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. The same with being able to identify birds by ear. The same with any skill. You develop that by you got to get in there and put in the reps. And sounds like Pam got that brush in your hand and kept you pointed in the right direction.
She did. And I will be eternally grateful for her for that. Well, this has been a fantastic, eye-opening, inspiring conversation for me. And I want to thank you once again on behalf of the entire Sibley Nature Center staff for taking the time and bringing your family with you and teaching your nature journaling class to us, and for conducting our solar eclipse activity today. And it has been our honor and our privilege and our pleasure, and I do hope that our paths will cross again someday.
Well, I look forward to that. It's been an absolute delight and an honor for me to be invited out here to your community. You've just made me feel so welcome, and speaking for myself and my whole family, we just have loved this experience, exploring Midland, meeting the people in it, and having a chance to encounter natural places and spaces within your community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A pleasure. Where'd they go?
And I guess that's the wrap.
I guess so. End scene.